Do you want your business to grow faster? Are you open to new and out-of-the-box ways to drive revenues and increase value? How do you imagine the most successful entrepreneurs and business leaders double, triple, or expand their businesses tenfold or more? The answer is Deals. This is a weekly podcast featuring conversations with business owners, executives, and leaders as we reveal behind-the-scenes details that give you, our listeners, the confidence to pursue your own deal-driven growth. On this show, we discuss a huge variety of deals, everything from large, complex mergers and acquisitions, capital raising, joint ventures, strategic alliances, real estate, affiliate and sponsorship deals, franchising, and more. My name is Kupfer, and I've been supporting deal-driven growth for businesses for over 35 years as a successful entrepreneur, professional negotiator, and attorney. My goal is to help you strategize, plan for, find, and complete deals that will help your company grow faster. Welcome to the DealQuest Podcast. Let's get started. Omar Morillo is the founder of Imperio Wealth Advisors, a boutique wealth management firm built to serve entrepreneurs, business owners, and families navigating complexity around liquidity, taxes, risk, and long-term decision-making. His work centers on simplifying sophisticated financial challenges so clients can make clear, confident decisions before, during, and after major inflection points, such as exits, recapitalizations, and concentrations of wealth. Listen, he's had years in the industry. He's got all the designations, right? He's a CFP, he's an accredited investment fiduciary. He's a chartered financial consultant. As many of you know, we have a lot of folks in the wealth management business that we deal with. And Omar is somebody that focuses on some of the things that our listeners care about. And we're going to be talking about how you prepare for exit, what you do after exit, and all that kind of good stuff. Omar, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me on, Corey. I'm honored to be here.
Well, so listen, before we get into all of your experience and how you work with clients and the wisdom you're going to bring everybody on this podcast, I want to take you back to when you were a little kid growing up, maybe 8, 10, 12 years old. What did you want to be? Because I'm guessing a professional in wealth management space, a planner, probably wasn't it back then, but you tell me.
No, it really wasn't. I always tell people that this is kind of a business you just fall into because when I was that age, I think I wanted to be an airline pilot. I wanted to fly airplanes.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously this is going to come out a while after we record it, but literally, I was just on a being interviewed by a Bloomberg reporter who I assume the article will have been released a month and a half before folks are hearing this, but on deals in the airline space and on what's going on with Spirit and what happens in distressed airline deals. So it's interesting. You mentioned being a pilot. One other question looking back, what was your first deal that you were involved in of any type? It might have been something early in your career, or maybe there's something before that.
Well, recently, actually, I'd like to tell you about something that I'm excited about from recent times.
Sure.
Sure. It's an education company, online education, global online education. Met the founder at a global business summit from YPO in Dubai. And we just hit it off, and I decided, hey, you know what? I think that online education is something that wasn't just a fad from COVID. I think it's here to stay. And I think that it's a framework that's going to have a tremendous impact in giving access to education to children across different regions and populations. And I'm excited about it.
Wow. So this is interesting. It's funny. If anybody listens to this podcast knows that I just listen and ask the next natural question. The guests don't get, the questions in advance. I don't have other than the way I open and close, I don't have a format. So it's interesting. I was actually watching a video on YouTube with Andrew Yang, who was talking about the impact of AI on different professions. And he was saying, the interviewer was surprised when he said that he actually thought that teachers would not be replaced, soon. And he said, well, it's online education, learning, whatever. And they said, yeah, but it's still something about, especially for, we're talking about younger folks, not adults, right? They're having a teacher in the classroom, plus not to mention there's unions and, whatever, and people want that interaction. And I think he's probably right on that. But at the same time, in terms of the way certainly adult and even kids learn various things. The host was saying Wait a second. I can pull up a YouTube video or go 12 levels deep with ChatGPT or, another, or Claude or one or the other and really, really learn about a particular topic. So it's very interesting in this time in that, in the online learning space on how things are going to evolve and how it's going to affect human learning. I don't know if you have any, I know it's not the topic but I don't know if you have any thoughts on how that's evolving there.
No, it's like, to quote King Solomon, there's nothing new under the sun, right?
Right.
I think
Right.
that I think that the more things change, the more they stay the same to a degree. Obviously, things like AI are changing how we do business. They're having a tremendous impact, but there's also that need and want for connection
Yes.
that I think cannot be replaced, at least not yet.
Yeah.
And I just came back from Chicago, and walking down the street, I see a bunch of people wearing like wide leg pants, and I'm like, I thought it was like skinny pants, and now we're back to wide leg. So right, it's oh, it's not old, it's vintage, right? Like, so I think at some point we're gonna have like rotary phones again in the house and call it like a statement of rebellion against the status quo. And I'm saying that tongue in cheek, but the truth is, Corey, I think that these are trends that obviously are going to affect the way that we learn, the way our children or grandchildren interact with one another. But I think at the end of the day, you're still going to have that human connection and that human touch that people are ultimately going to crave. I don't see it going away. If anything, I think my prediction, for what it's worth, is that there will come a point where the opposite will be true. When a company says we use AI, the differentiator will be, no, we use humans.
Right.
When you call us, you're going to talk to a real person.
Right.
When you come to our academy, even if it's online, there's a real person there interacting with you
Yeah.
who cares about you. And I think that that's just going to be the way things trend.
Yeah, totally get it. I mean, listen, you're right. It's funny. Everything all like vinyl records, right? Become, huge again, right? And
It's funny you say that. My kid has it. My sister gave him for his 17th birthday a vinyl record player,
uh,
and he has the Michael Jackson album, and then he went and got Daft Punk and all these things. So yeah, to your point. And he loves it. Like, he's like so proud of it. Like, Dad, look at my vinyl record player, He
I
loves that
love it.
thing.
I love it. All right. So moving more on topic, tell us a little bit, because one of the things that you work with folks on is, not just obviously, you have clients, you provide general wealth management, retirement, advice and planning, but also folks getting prepared or even not imminent, back, like I always say to clients, right, everything is like further in advance, the better, right? Talking about advising and planning for somebody who is an entrepreneur, who owns a company, who at some point, will exit, right? And monetize that. So talk to us a little bit about that and some of the things that you look at with your clients.
Yeah, so we focus on looking at the wealth management process through a tax lens.
Yep.
And it focuses on reducing lifetime income tax drag. And that is across the income they're earning today, the investments that they have working today, and any working capital, and of course, liquidity events.
Yes.
And there's a series of supporting pillars that support those outcomes. So for instance, when we're looking at income tax reduction, so what you're earning today, we look at low-hanging fruit, like, hey, what are retirement savings doing to offset your income tax exposure? And for the folks that we're dealing with, they're well past and graduated, having an ordinary 401k plan or a profit sharing plan. We're looking more at pensions and cash balance plans. We're looking at how their entities are structured and collaborating with their advisors to ensure that they have the optimal positioning for tax mitigation. And of course, we're looking at any advanced deductions that we can take advantage of, whether that involves using 1031 exchanges for real estate transactions or through Delaware statutory trust, or we're looking at qualified opportunity zone funds as well to defer capital gains. But overall, like, instead of looking at the portfolio as just a tool for wealth accumulation, we're looking at it through a lens of how can we leverage what you are currently already building and growing to offset tax liability in other areas of your balance sheet. So that's where tax-aware investments come in. That's where looking at strategies like overlays and long shorts makes a lot of sense, or direct indexing, right, at a more advanced level. And then when it comes to liquidity planning and exit, right, which is really the area that you pointed to, it's just the sooner the better, like you said earlier. But, leave no stone unturned. Consider alternatives like installment sales. or staged exits. And some folks that we deal with, they're not necessarily looking to exit entirely.
Yep.
They're looking to just take off some chips off the table and bring in an investor or partner, but without losing the identity of their company and the feel that it has to them. Because so much of their entity, of their self-identity is tied to the business, right? So those are just some of the areas that we explore. And of course, we can dive deep about, estate planning and all the other nifty ideas that people can look at. I just think that as a team at our firm, we're focused on not becoming dogmatic. There's always the flavor of the month. It's QSBS. Well, listen, qualified small business stock may make sense for some people, but sometimes you run the analysis and hey, maybe the taxes you're going to pay over those 5 years when you make that conversion, maybe they don't justify making the conversion. So there's no one size fits all. We want to approach every situation with an agnostic lens and just try to figure out what's the best fit for the entrepreneur at the end of the day.
Yeah. So, I mean, let's delve in. All right. So we're given the disclaimers, right? None of this is specific advice to any particular person. It's going to be customized and tailored to, but you have somebody there 5-10 years out from an exit, right? They're going to get a substantial amount of money. They're going to get, say, at least tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, right, on an exit. What are some of the things that they can do in advance? Obviously, you mentioned QSBS, analyzing whether that makes sense or not. What are some of the other things that they should be, that are options, not necessarily recommendations specifically, but options that they should be, that you consider with them?
Well, turning existing assets into capital gain offset makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So we've seen a lot of interest and a lot of engagement from clients and folks that are referred to our firm in investing in a manner that, while maintaining the growth of their assets in their portfolio, generates capital losses that they can use to offset their capital gain exposure in the future. And again, we're ad nauseum. We're going to say the sooner the better, because the more years you have with these things running, then the more compounding you get to take advantage of. So, for example, in a scenario like that, when you're talking about someone having an exit for $100 million, let's just say that today they have a liquid portfolio of $20 million and they're able to position it in such a way that it generates losses that they can carry forward and accumulate. By the time the liquidity event presents itself, they could have potentially a $40-50 million offset if all the right parameters are met. And so now their $100 million exit that would have generated capital gains taxes on $100 million can potentially be sliced in half. And that's a huge deal.
Yeah. So let's stick with that for a second, because I've been hearing a lot. And again, I don't know how much you're using, and we don't have to go down this road, but there's been like this whole long short thing, this drawing a blank on the name, like this one that everybody's talking about now around, generating significant losses, up front now or whatever. I don't know why it'll come to me, but I'm drawing a blank on what's the latest one that a lot of my clients are talking about. So, talk to us a little bit about those vehicles and who they're appropriate for. Yeah,
So these vehicles,
what's up front with, kind of thing.
Yeah, so let's think about the simple side of things, right? Which is that if you're a believer in Warren Buffett's philosophy that no money manager can beat the S&P 500 in a 10-year period, right? Let's just start with that.
Yes.
Okay, so if you believe that, then more than likely you believe in buying an ETF like SPY or VOO, right? And just buy the S&P 500, just using that as an example, right?
Yep.
So that. I'll say that's level one. And then so level two is you meet an advisor and your advisor says, well, okay, let's stick to that. But instead of buying the ETF, let's unpack the basket and own all the stocks directly, right? And so now we're getting into direct indexing, right? That's level two.
Yep.
And by owning these stocks throughout the year, we'll sell off the ones that are underperforming. We'll generate some losses inside the portfolio, and we'll gain some tax off. We'll gain a better return just by sheer virtue of taking advantage of the moments in which the components of the index are being less than efficient, right?
Yes.
And so once you can buy into that philosophy, then level three, which is this long short stuff that we're discussing, is, well, why don't we go a step further and leverage and go long, buy more of the stocks that, from a quantitative research analysis standpoint makes the most sense to be heavily invested into. And then let's short, right? Let's borrow those those shares that we think are going to underperform. By virtue of doing so, we're going to generate more losses, right? And so ideally, this is for someone who believes in tax-aware investment, has a certain degree of sophistication and a tolerance for risk. Ideally, this is for business owners or real estate investors or others that are facing significant capital gain events.
Yes.
Beginning the process years in advance is what actually allows for the accumulation of a loss bank that can be deployed at the time that is needed the most, typically in an exit. That's who this is for. But I wanted to preface who it's for by kind of giving a little bit of like, hey, here's what level 1, level 2, level 3 looks like.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, AQR was the one I was thinking about that I keep hearing about. No, I'm not, by the way, there's not a recommendation. I'm just saying I'm hearing a lot AQR. And then I think there's a Flex something, like there's a couple of birds. Like that's the one that a lot of my advisor clients, people that I hear, are talking about suddenly, like in the last year, I've heard a lot about it.
Yeah, the interesting thing is that long short is not a new thing,
No.
but it has been democratized, and seeing the benefits of it is really what's propelling it forward as a wealth planning tool for entrepreneurs and individuals that are facing liquidity events and high capital gain exposure.
Yeah, it's interesting. And listen, like every other investment, there's risk in it, right? Whatever, but you're doing the best you can in terms of planning. Yeah, it's the other thing that I had a conversation about this, my wife and I. I've been doing more and more on the philanthropic side. We have a goal to do more and more on that. And we were talking to our advisors about when it might make sense to do a DAF, right? And they were like, well, certainly in a high income year, that's the time to really look at it. So I'm not planning a liquidity event right now, but you could also do some stuff around charitable planning as well, right?
100%. Yeah. Big fan of donor advised funds. Not saying that to follow your your example. I'm not saying that as a recommendation, but it's just something that we see that has a lot of sense, because in a high income year, a big donation to a donor advised fund can offset a substantial exposure to income taxes, while providing the future optionality of deciding, hey, where can we suggest that the fund allocate these investments or these donations where we can feel that they can make the greatest impact. So absolutely, being charitable is definitely something that can have a tremendously positive benefit in more ways than one, right? Not just the tax exposure, but you're doing something good for society too.
Of course. All right. Anything else that comes up that, are, again, not recommendations, but possibilities in terms of like what people should be thinking about if they think an exit's coming up, in terms of other vehicles or other strategies that they should be at least exploring with somebody like you or their existing advisors?
I think that taking a look at the estate plan can never be downplayed. I think that it can make a tremendous difference in the future outcome for not just yourself, but future generations, especially if there's an opportunity to gift shares when they're valued at a lower amount. Obviously, and I think I'm going to say this till I'm blue in the face, you don't want to wait till the last minute to do these things when there's a letter, an LOI already on the table.
Right.
But
when the independent evidence of the value of the company at that time.
Yeah, definitely trying to avoid that is a good idea. But gifting of shares and setting up the proper trust structures, I think, makes a lot of sense from an estate planning standpoint as well. Planning for liquidity, making sure that the right boxes are checked, and that, look, there's folks who don't want to give shares of their company to their kids, no matter what you tell them, and that's okay. But an alternative to consider is at least buy yourself a permission slip to be able to enjoy your assets, because there will be a tax liability due, assuming that we're talking about a substantial liquidity event. The estate taxes are due 9 months after you pass, and if you want to ensure that your legacy remains in your bloodline, then it behooves you to create paths to liquidity to be able to address that. So I'm often citing the example of the Miami Dolphins previous owners, right? There was no planning done there. Family had to sell the team because they didn't have liquidity to meet the tax obligations. So something as simple as an eyelid and just buying some simple life insurance, there's no need to reinvent the wheel. But when I say no need to reinvent the wheel, I also tend to caution entrepreneurs who come to us looking for advice on strategies that are already kind of preconceived. Like we're seeing a lot of interest around PPLI, private placement life insurance. And there are some investor control rules that we're cautioning business owners around. There's folks setting up some of these contracts offshore and telling business owners that, hey, just give the shares of your company to this structure and then you don't have to pay taxes. It's really not that simple. I guess from the standpoint of, yeah, do gifting. Yes, do QSBS if it works. Yes, do portfolio planning that's strategic and gives you the ability to offset. But don't go so far down the rabbit hole that you get yourself into some trouble. I guess would be my thoughts.
Oh, good. I'm sure that we have, our listenership has grown so much, and it's varied. I'm sure there are people who know PPLI really well, and some have no idea what you're talking about. I've had a number of folks sit down with me on PPLI, not necessarily for me, although, they'd be happy if I did, but, just as a vehicle for my clients, right, to recommend. And let's just give a little bit of education on what PPLI is.
So in a nutshell, what a private placement life. So let's think about traditional insurance first. I think that's a good place to start because we all know how that works, right? So you go to a mutual company usually, right? And they give you a life insurance contract, which has a mortality calculation that determines the premium that you're going to pay, and they're going to pay a death benefit, right? And then there's a cash value component, specifically when we're talking about permanent life insurance.
Yeah, if it's not term.
Yeah, if it's not term, right? So, and you have a plethora of options. Universal, index universal, you have variable, you have whole life, right? So traditionally, right, whole life is like a black box, right? The company gets to make the investments decisions. They pay you a dividend, or some people have called it an overpayment of premium, whatever you want to call it, right? But you have no control and you have no say on what happens to that. But part of the appeal of using these contracts is that as the cash value accumulates within the structure, you're able to leverage it. You can borrow against it, right? And because it's a loan, whatever you took out is technically not taxable. And upon death, then if the loan hasn't been repaid, it gets offset against the death benefit, right? So that's kind of the regular wrapper of insurance.
Yeah.
When we're talking about private placement life insurance, you're essentially saying, I'm going to create the same wrapper for myself, privately owned, but instead of handing off the responsibility to an insurance company, I'm going to place these assets of mine, and I'm going to hire an investment manager, and I'm going to have them manage assets that are going to be owned within this wrapper. And the appeal is that then you get the same tax treatment for those assets as you would have in a traditional cash value insurance. That's it in a nutshell when it comes to PPLI.
Let's take a break from the show for a minute so I can tell you about an incredible resource my team and I have put together for you. Secrets of Deal-Driven Growth, Creative Ways to Grow Your Business Even in Challenging Times, is a powerful ebook that helps you take DealQuest podcast episodes and apply them to your own life and business. This is the ideal tool for anyone looking for creative ways to grow as deal makers, and you can get yours now. It's as easy as heading to corykupfer.com/workbook and downloading your copy. While you're there, you can also consider joining our dynamic deal-driven community of founders, experts, small business owners, and entrepreneurs. Now back to the show. Yeah. And, it's a vehicle that's pitched to ultra high net worth folks because, the cost involved to set it up, right? And the ongoing cost, whatever, it's not even something to consider, until you're at a certain level. And then obviously, as you started to allude to earlier, there are risks and other issues you need to really look into.
Yeah, it's like anything in life. When it's again flavor of the month, right? I remember at one point it was captive insurance company. So just create your own insurance company. Just go captive. You're gonna get to put away this much money every year. You don't have to pay taxes. Like, whoa, there's a little bit more than that involved in it. And traditionally, to your point, Corey, these things are presented to high net worth and ultra high net worth individuals. And the only thing that's usually discussed are the benefits, not the drawbacks. And I just had a confidential conversation with someone unnamed, but who was looking into this. And I said, look, this PPLI thing, the way that you're looking to structure it doesn't make sense for you because your clients want to do it, but they have their money manager amongst other investments placing your fund that you own and control into their PPLI. Whereas you are the owner and controller of the fund and you want to create a PPLI to put that into, you may be running afoul of the investor control rules. And well, such and such says, I said, look, anybody can tell you what they want, but when the IRS comes knocking and your deduction gets disallowed and you got the penalties and interest and fines, they're nowhere to be found. And you can sue them, but you still got to deal with the problem. So, sometimes when you look at these strategies that are very complex, sometimes the cure is worse than the disease. So
It's funny that you use that sort of medical cure for, disease, because and this is totally off topic, but it's just the analogy for me is like I'm wondering all these GLP-1 weight loss drugs, right? Talk about flavor of the month, the latest thing, everything's great, they help you drop weight. And now, you're starting to hear, well, you lose muscle weight. Well, it does this. Well, it does that. It's a good analogy in that, folks, this happens in the financial services space, right? It's exactly, things become hot. And listen, part of it is, is human nature. And this is where I have a lot of, it's funny, I've said this a few times, but when I work, we just switch firms we work with personally on the advisory side, just to get everything under one roof. And the bottom line is, I said, we're going to be the easiest clients you ever have. You're never getting a call from like the market drops. You're not getting a panic call from me, right? Like I know long-term investment, right? I don't watch the market every day. I don't look for that hot stock tip. I don't look for the latest strategy. Obviously, if there are strategies that we can do that make sense and that mitigate or minimize tax or anything, sure. But I'm not one of those guys who's going to be calling you up because my buddy did something or I just read it in the newspaper or I'm hearing whatever. It's just not me, right? Yeah, I feel like it's like in anything, whether it's the weight loss drugs or whether it's in financial services, there's always people who are drawn to and people who want to promote, the latest, hot thing that will, is the miracle cure, so to speak.
yeah, I have a friend who recently told me that his father went blind and it was the GLP-1 that did it. So I'm not saying that to say that it's medical advice, but the man ran around a lot trying to figure out what was going on, why he was losing his vision, and it turned out that now they're admitting it, that hey, it does cause blindness, because at first it was no, of course not, GLP-1s can't do that, and now it's like, oh yeah, it does, it's a risk, and it's like, well, that's a big risk. And when you're looking at someone planning an exit, and okay, fine, this is going to help you offset 5 or 10 or $15 million, but then it's going to cost you 25 or 30 to rectify, then what's the point? And that's always been my viewpoint. Like, let's make sure that it's straightforward, that we have case law that can back up the claims of whatever provider is offering things, and look at the good, the bad, and the ugly. And if you can still deal with it, then that's fine. In some cases, like even when it's justified to implement a structure, whether it's PPLI or something else, are you going to be able to sleep 10 years from now to, knowing that you have to maintain these things and that you have to follow these formalities? Like, we've had clients that come to us talking about, oh, I heard in this, especially with medical professionals, oh, I heard that I need a trust in order to protect my assets. Well, yeah, but there's formalities that you have to follow. And if you violate those formalities, then it does away the entire protection. So what you need to ask yourself is, can you do this for 10, 15, 20 years to keep the protection that it provides? I'll tell you, Corey, that 90% of the time, the answer is no.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, so then there you have it. Like, why go down the rabbit hole if you're not going to be able to deal with the day-to-day running of this thing?
Yeah, I mean, tax savings are great, but they're not the only driver, right? Especially with this risk or administrative burden or headache involved, no question about it. All right, let's shift to the other side, in terms of the post-exit conversation, right? I mean, easy enough to say, especially if somebody walks out with a huge amount of money, okay, great, you're going to put it in a diversified safe portfolio and whatever, but and they'll be fine. And you know what? At a certain level, they'll be fine, right? They won't have to worry about whether the next, But obviously, folks are using more sophisticated strategies who, have these kind of exits. Talk about it a little bit. And I know the given is you're going to say, well, hopefully they did the planning beforehand, because that's going to set them up. But
Yeah.
What are they
Yeah.
looking at? What are they looking at? When that money's actually coming in.
And I don't know to what degree you see this in financial services, but it doesn't matter whether the lady or gentleman walked away with, 5 million, 30 million, or 100. There's this tendency to think, well, what if it all goes away?
Yeah.
I don't know if that you come across that.
No, I do. I do. People, especially when you're talking about people who, well, I think I was supposed to say, especially, I was thinking about if self-made entrepreneurs or whatever, but even like I remember many years ago, God, probably 20 something years ago, there's Lynn Twist who wrote some of the books with Solo Money and that kind of stuff. Now, she used to be the head of strategic funding, basically the head fundraiser for the Hunger Project. And
Mm.
Lynn used to talk about, even with, like, she used to say that she became a great fundraiser when she actually learned to have empathy for the wealthy. Because in the beginning, when she was younger, she would go into somebody that'd have billions of dollars, and she wanted to write a $5,000 check, the Hunger Project or whatever, and they would say no, and like she would be like, even though they said that they care about the cause and all that kind of stuff, whatever, and she would be like she'd have a lot of judgments or whatever, and then she sort of realized as she dug into it that because people have money doesn't mean that their relationship to money, right, is healthy, or they don't, like, they could have billions of dollars and still be living in scarcity or being afraid to lose it. So even when it's not self-made, even when it's second generation, like sometimes, and listen, people who are born with wealth, there is a narrative that everybody's out to get it, right? And there's some truth to that, right? So yes, I think wherever you come from, there is that, almost nobody is just fully, like, people have to do a lot of work on themselves to be able to just fully breathe and be in it without, having something going on around it, even if they have the money. And one of the things that I've talked about a lot of this podcast recently is actually founded depression, right? There's a lot coming out now about people who even get not only life change, generational change in money. And then you said, it's their identity, it's their purpose, right? And then they don't know, they at least have trouble because they don't know who they are. So yeah, there's a lot that happens post transition that money can't solve. And what Dave Hirsch, who was a guest on the podcast earlier, an early episode, calls this the smallest violin problem. Like, wait, just be bid for $100 million and you're depressed. Like, how many people can have sympathy for you on that? But it's a real thing. People don't understand that, the money doesn't solve everything.
I think you just said people don't understand. And it's one of those things that you have to live through to get it, right? I think that when they are still operating and running their business, not only is identity, sense of purpose, but also there's also this safety blanket or the safety net that's like, hey, you know what? If it all goes haywire tomorrow, I can always make the money again because I have this engine that generates money. Well, now I sold the engine, right? So now all I have is this brokerage accounts and these assets. And if those go kaput, then what goes next? Like I would have to build it from scratch, and that would be daunting, especially later on in life. So I see a lot of that, and that depression. I remember one time I was listening to one of those TED Talks, and they were just talking about how we plan for retirement from the perspective of, oh, I'm gonna go to a beach in Mexico or in Jamaica or whatever tropical place, south of France, and I'm gonna have 10 Mai Tais a day. And it's like, yeah, and then your liver's gonna give out 3 months in.
Right.
You can only do that for so long, and it's not sustainable. So finding purpose and creating purpose, I think, is essential beyond the business. And I think that, as we've said multiple times, I think that comes with plenty of soul searching and planning well in advance of the exit. Because, and I'm even using myself as this example. Like if I was to exit today, yeah, sure, I'd have some fun maybe for a year or two, and then after that, I wouldn't know what to do with myself.
Yeah.
So I can completely understand that, and you have to be in that situation to think that way and be able to relate. So I love that point that you raised about having empathy for the other person, and try to put yourself in their shoes, regardless of how much of a small violin problem it may be from your perspective.
Yeah, exactly. Let me sort of take a step back and ask you, a bigger general question. Are there any, whether it's, with your business owner clients, what are you seeing? Are there any trends you're seeing and any things that particularly concerned about, or are you seeing, things that they're more drawn to, anything that's happening that you think is, significantly affecting their businesses or their decision making in terms of how they choose some of these vehicles? anything you see in the industry that might be of interest, if anything.
The concern is always around tax for most business owners. I am seeing and I am hearing from some of our clients concern about the impact of fuel prices rising on everything in the economy and cost of living, etc. But beyond those things, I'm not really seeing much else being drummed up for attention. What I will say is that for the clients that are invested in private credit, because of the news cycle, there's been some questions. Hey, how exposed am I, and how does this impact things for my household? But the truth is, if you're having a good due diligence and manager selection on the front end, that mitigates a lot of those issues. And in our case, I think I mentioned to you, Corey, we're leveraging Mariner Wealth Advisors for these things, and they've been a really good partner on that front. And so we haven't had much to worry about in that regard.
And folks, for those of you who are interested in the RA space, a couple of years ago, we did do a series with the CEOs of some of the top serial acquisition and growing firms. Marty Pecknold from Mariner was one of them that was on that series. And, Marty's been giant in the industry for many, many years. So that's a cool episode to listen to as well. Alrighty, so it's and by the way, I wasn't planning on plugging this, but I am doing, just for listeners, I am planning on doing another episode with some of the other heads of various of these firms that weren't on the last time, and it might be a little. I think we're going to be focusing it on some of those firms that aren't the super well known PE-backed serial acquirers, to let people know about some of the alternatives out there for other folks that are other platforms and buyers. So, any case, all right. Tell us a little bit more about just who your ideal clients, and then I definitely want to give you a chance to let people know where they reach you. But like, who are the folks you work with most?
Yeah, so we're always working with business owners, entrepreneurs who are concerned about their tax exposure today and their income. They are looking for tax efficiency on the assets they've accumulated as of date, and they have an eye forward towards an exit that they want to make sure that they optimize for. So those are our areas of expertise, and typically the folks that we're working with are, above $5 million in investable assets. They check that qualified purchaser box, and what that does for us as a team is that it enables us to unlock a lot more solutions that can help offset the issues that they're facing and challenges that they're facing.
Great. And people want to find you, connect with you, what's the best way?
Absolutely. So our website is imperialwealthadvisors.com. And you can find me on LinkedIn, Omar Morillo. I'm happy to connect there as well. And if you want to drop us a line, email address is info@imperiowa.com.
Wonderful. So, Omar, my final question on the podcast is always about my highest value in life, which is freedom. And for me, that means everything from freedom around the world for people against depression to why I've been an entrepreneur and haven't had a boss for decades. What does freedom mean to you, and how does it impact your life and business?
Freedom for me means being able to spend time with my family. Freedom for me means being able to jump on a plane and go explore the world and share that with my children and the people I love. And freedom for me also means being able to think about being able to give back to others and think beyond myself. I think that given my background, I don't come from wealth. I'm a first generation entrepreneur, and being able to create a life where those things are a possibility, and being able to give my children the viewpoint that this is something that they can do for themselves as well. I think that fills me with purpose every day.
Love that answer. Omar Morillo, thanks for being such a great guest on the DealQuest Podcast.
Thank you for having me, Corey. It's been an honor.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of DealQuest, where we help you understand how deal-driven growth can be your ticket to freedom. If you are interested in finding out more about my law firm, the services we provide to entrepreneurial and growing companies across industries all over the country, and my partner Brian Megan and I, and my amazing team, just head over to kupferlaw.com. That's kupferlaw.com. And if you want to follow more of my content, head over to my LinkedIn page where I post regularly. I'm Corey Kupfer. Until next week, wishing you the freedom and financial prosperity that I know your DealQuest will bring.